6 months ago, my wife and I were living like two absolute strangers under the same roof. After a devastating family tragedy, the warmth completely left our home. We stopped talking, we slept in separate rooms, and our lawyers were already drafting the divorce papers. But one freezing Tuesday evening, on my way home from a miserable shift at the warehouse, I found an old, badly injured dog shivering under a dumpster in the pouring rain. I brought him home just for one night to save him from freezing. I had no idea that this silent, broken animal was about to dismantle the walls we had built around our hearts, or that he would be the only reason we are still together today. My name is Ethan, 35M, and my wife is Chloe, 33F. We had been happily married for 8 years. We had a beautiful life, big plans, and a small, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Ohio. But a year and a half ago, our world collapsed. We went through a deeply painful personal loss, a tragedy that happens to many families, but one that you are never truly prepared for. Instead of bringing us closer together, the grief acted like an invisible wedge. Chloe locked herself in her sorrow, spending hours staring at the wall, while I buried myself in overwork, staying at the automotive parts warehouse until midnight, just to avoid the suffocating silence of our living room. We were drowning in our own pain, unable to comfort each other. By the time winter arrived, the emotional distance between us felt as vast as an ocean. We had completely given up on our marriage. On that specific rainy evening, the temperature was dropping rapidly toward freezing. As I walked toward my car in the empty warehouse parking lot, I heard a faint, wet cough coming from behind the heavy metal garbage dumpsters. I shined my phone's flashlight into the dark gap and saw a large, pathetic-looking crossbreed dog. He was completely soaked, his ribs were visible through his matted fur, and he had a deep, infected cut on his front paw. He was too weak to run away. When the light hit his eyes, he didn't growl or bare his teeth. He just looked at me with a heavy, accepting sadness, as if he had accepted that his life was ending right there in the mud. I couldn't leave him. I ruined the back seat of my old sedan, wrapped him in a dirty work jacket, and drove him home. When I carried him through the front door, Chloe was sitting on the sofa in the dark. She looked at the bloody, shivering animal in my arms, and for the first time in an entire year, I saw a spark of actual emotion flash in her hollow eyes. We didn't argue that night. The sheer urgency of saving the dog's life forced us into an unspoken, immediate truce. Without saying a word to each other about our ruined marriage, we went to work. Chloe rushed to the bathroom and brought out every old towel we had, while I carefully laid the dog down on the warm kitchen floor. We spent 2 hours cleaning his matted fur, washing the infected wound on his leg, and feeding him warm broth from a spoon. For the first time in 12 months, we were operating as a team again, our hands occasionally brushing against each other as we held the trembling animal down. We named him Buster. Buster never made a single sound, no barking, no whining. He just lay there, watching our frantic movements with those deep, grateful amber eyes. When we finally finished, he dragged his exhausted body onto an old blanket in the corner of the kitchen and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, the old coldness tried to return to the house. I woke up early, intending to call the local animal control or a shelter to take Buster away, as we were supposed to be packing our things for the upcoming separation. But when I walked into the kitchen, I saw Chloe sitting on the floor right next to the dog's blanket. She was gently stroking his head, and Buster had rested his heavy, scarred chin directly on her knee. Her shoulders were shaking, and she was silently crying. Not the cold, distant tears of depression I had seen for a year, but a real, healing release of grief. Buster just sat there, completely still, absorbing her pain without moving an inch. I stood in the doorway, my phone in my hand, and quietly deleted the shelter's number. We agreed to keep him just until his leg healed completely. We told ourselves it was a temporary arrangement. But Buster had other plans for our family. Weeks turned into months, and Buster became the center of our daily existence. His presence forced a new, healthy routine into our broken lives. Because of his injured leg, he needed short, slow walks 3 times a day. At first, Chloe and I would take turns walking him separately, avoiding each other's company. But Buster was incredibly stubborn. If I tried to take his leash alone, he would sit down on the front porch and refuse to move an inch, staring back at the front window where Chloe was standing. He wouldn't budge until we both walked down the steps together. So we started walking him as a family. In the beginning, those walks were silent and awkward. The only sound was the crunch of frozen autumn leaves beneath our boots and Buster's rhythmic limping stride ahead of us. But slowly, the silence began to soften. We started talking about Buster, how much food he was eating, how his limp was improving, or how he had a funny habit of collecting my old work socks and burying them under the living room rug. From those simple conversations about the dog, we gradually transitioned into talking about other things. We talked about our days, the stress at my warehouse, and the book Chloe had finally started reading again. Buster was like a living bridge between 2 isolated islands. He walked exactly between us, his fluffy tail brushing against our legs, constantly keeping us within arm's reach of one another. One evening, during a particularly cold sunset walk, it started to freeze. Without thinking, I reached out and took Chloe's hand to help her over a patch of black ice. She didn't pull away. She squeezed my hand back, her fingers cold but her grip firm. We finished the walk in silence, but it was a completely different kind of silence than before. The real test of our healing came in the middle of January. A severe winter storm hit our town, dropping temperatures well below zero and freezing the aging infrastructure of our neighborhood. At around 2 a.m., while Chloe and I were still sleeping in our separate bedrooms, Buster did something he had never done before. He walked into my room, stood right beside my bed, and began to forcefully nudge my arm with his cold, wet nose. When I tried to push him away, he let out a low, urgent whine, the very first vocal sound he had made since we brought him home. I sat up, realizing something was wrong. I followed him out into the hallway, where he immediately ran to Chloe's bedroom door and began scratching at it frantically. I knocked and entered her room. Chloe was awake, shivering under her blankets, but as I stepped onto the carpet, I realized my feet were soaking wet. A major water pipe inside the drywall behind her closet had burst due to the extreme freezing temperatures. Freezing water was rapidly flooding the room, destroying her clothes, family photo albums, and running straight toward the main electrical outlet on the baseboard. If Buster hadn't woken us up in that exact minute, the water would have hit the live electrical wires while Chloe was asleep, causing a catastrophic fire or a fatal electrical surge through the wet floor. In a panic, I rushed down to the basement to shut off the main water valve while Chloe frantically tried to move her precious belongings out of the flooding room. We spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, exhausted, cold, but working side by side to mop up the mess and save what remained of our memories. As the sun began to rise over the snowy suburbs, the kitchen was finally dry. Chloe and I were sitting on the floor, wrapped in a single large blanket, drinking hot coffee. We looked at each other. Our faces were covered in dust, our clothes were damp, and we looked completely exhausted. But for the first time in a year and a half, the invisible wall between us was completely gone. We didn't look like 2 people waiting for a divorce anymore. We looked like a couple that had survived a storm together. Chloe looked at me, her eyes clear and full of warmth, and said, "I don't want to leave this house, Ethan. I don't want to leave you." I held her tight, burying my face in her shoulder, feeling the crushing weight of our past grief finally melt away. Buster was lying right next to us, his head resting on his paws, watching us with a calm, satisfied expression. He had completed his job. The divorce papers were never signed. Instead, we burned them in our fireplace that very weekend. Today, our house is full of life again. We still have scars from our tragedy, just like Buster has scars from his life on the streets. But those scars don't define us anymore. They just remind us of what we survived. Buster is no longer a temporary guest. He is the official heart of our family. He taught us that when life breaks you into pieces, you don't run away from the people you love. You stay, you clean up the mess, and you rebuild the foundation together. This silent, broken stray dog didn't just find a home with us. He gave us a second life.